Lightning ripped the sky in half over Copper Ridge. For a split second, the whole Wyoming plain was lit up, stark white and shadow black, like an old photograph of a forgotten world. I was standing on the porch of my boarding house, Sullivan's Haven, the rain plastering my hair to my face. It was the third anniversary of Henry's death, and the sky seemed to be grieving right along with me, a wild, screaming kind of grief. The wind howled, a lonely sound that echoed the hollowness in my chest. At 42, I felt as weathered as the old wood of the porch, worn down by loss, sharpened by the simple, brutal need to survive. The house groaned behind me, its old bones protesting the storm. It was like me, stubborn, still standing. Then another flash, closer this time, a blinding, jagged spear of light that slammed into the ancient oak tree by the storage barn. I watched, frozen for a heart-stopping second, as a shower of sparks rained down. A thin, hungry plume of smoke began to curl up from the base of the trunk. Fire! The word was ripped from my throat, nearly swallowed by the wind. I didn't think. I just ran. My nightdress clung to my legs as I launched myself off the porch, my bare feet hitting the muddy ground. The barn held all our winter feed. After a summer-long drought, everything was tinder dry. This rain wouldn't stop a blaze once it took hold. I was halfway there when a figure detached itself from the storm-swept darkness. A man, tall and broad, running toward me from the road. My hand instinctively went to my hip, searching for the knife I hadn't carried in years. A widow learns to be cautious. But then he shouted, his voice a low command that cut through the gale. "Get water, I'll check the tree." There was no arguing with that voice. I pivoted without a thought, sprinting for the well pump. As I worked the handle, my arms screaming in protest, I saw him reach the smoldering oak. He didn't hesitate. He started tearing at the burning bark with his bare hands, stomping out the embers that were already licking at the dry grass. By the time I got back, sloshing a heavy bucket of water, the worst was over. Together we doused the last of the glowing hot spots, working in a strange, silent rhythm. The immediate danger was gone. Only then, standing in the downpour beside the scarred and blackened tree, did I get a real look at him. Another flash of lightning illuminated his face, weathered, stern, a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard, and eyes the color of a winter sky. I knew who he was, of course. Everyone in Copper Ridge did, though we'd never spoken a word. "Mr. Montgomery," I said, my voice flat, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. Frederick Montgomery, owner of the sprawling Blue Valley Ranch, straightened up. He wiped his soot-covered hands on his soaked coat, his gaze flicking toward my boarding house. "Mrs. Hayes," he nodded stiffly, "saw the lightning strike from the road. That's when I saw him favoring his right hand. You're hurt." "It's nothing." He tried to hide it in his coat, but I saw the angry red blisters already forming on his palm. "I have salve and bandages inside," I insisted. Every part of me wanted to be alone on this night, to wrap myself in my grief, but hospitality and a debt for his help won out. "It's the least I can offer." He looked like he was about to refuse. But then the sky rumbled again, a low, threatening growl that seemed to make the decision for him. "Much obliged." The parlor was my sanctuary, modest but always clean. I lit a few more lamps, the warm glow pushing back the shadows in the storm. He stood before the stone fireplace where a small fire I'd lit earlier was now crackling to life. But he wasn't looking at the flames. He was staring at the portrait that hung above the mantel. My Henry. The artist had caught him perfectly, the serious set of his jaw, but with that hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth, the kindness in his eyes, the quiet strength that had made me follow him from the drawing rooms of Boston to this wild, untamed land. "Your husband?" Frederick asked, though it was clear he already knew. "Yes," I said, setting my medical kit on a small table. "Henry Sullivan." When I said the name, something flickered across Frederick's face. It was there and gone in an instant, so fast I thought I'd imagined it. A flash of recognition? No, it was more than that. It was something closer to pain. "Sullivan," he repeated, and the name seemed to catch in his throat. He looked from the portrait to me. You go by Hayes. My maiden name, I explained, not offering more. Please sit. Let me see that hand. He sat reluctantly, extending the burned palm. I worked in silence, cleaning the wound, applying the salve, wrapping it in clean linen. My hands were steady, practiced. Running a boarding house on the frontier made you a doctor, a carpenter, and a dozen other things out of sheer necessity. You've done this before, he observed, his voice a low rumble. You learn to handle all sorts of injuries out here, I said, tying off the bandage, as I'm sure you know, managing a place like Blue Valley. My son Daniel handles most of the day-to-day now, he said. There was pride in his voice, but it was shaded by something else, something heavy. I'm not as involved as I once was. I'd heard the whispers in town, of course, how Frederick Montgomery had become a recluse since his wife Rebecca died 4 years ago. How he haunted his own ranch like a ghost, present but not really there. Not unlike me, I thought with a bitter twist. Mama? We both turned. My daughter Lily stood on the stairs, her dark hair braided over the shoulder of her white nightgown. At 20, she had my jawline, but her father's thoughtful eyes. A combination that made her beautiful, but also unapproachable. She looked from me to our guest, her eyes full of questions. Mr. Montgomery was passing by, I explained. Lightning struck the oak. He helped me put out the fire. Lily came down the last few steps, her posture straightening as she took in our visitor. That was fortunate. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. Frederick stood, looking uncomfortable under her direct gaze. Anyone would have done the same. Perhaps, Lily said, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. But not everyone did. You did. Her words seemed to make him even more uneasy. He cleared his throat and turned back to me. The storm is letting up. I should be getting home. I walked him to the door. The lightning was a distant flicker now, the rain a gentle drizzle. Thank you again, I said quietly. That barn, it holds everything for the winter. He just nodded. Good night, Mrs. Hayes. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. My men can come by tomorrow to take care of that tree if you need. That's kind, but we can manage. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I don't doubt it. He pulled his hat low and stepped into the night, his tall frame quickly swallowed by the darkness. I closed the door and turned to find Lily watching me, her expression unreadable. What? I asked, suddenly feeling defensive. Nothing, she said, tilting her head. I've just never seen Frederick Montgomery up close. He's not what I expected. It's late, I said, moving past her toward the stairs. It's the anniversary, Lily said softly, stopping me in my tracks. Is that why you were outside? Thinking about Papa? How could I explain it to her? The desperate need to be under the open sky on this night, as if the heavens themselves might offer some connection to the man I'd lost. Go to bed, Lily, I said instead. We have guests arriving tomorrow. Alone in my room, I went to the small writing desk by the window. From the bottom drawer, I took out a small wooden box. Inside, tied with a faded blue ribbon, were Henry's letters. Everyone he'd ever written me. But underneath them was another envelope. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded. It wasn't from Henry, it was to him. It had arrived 3 days before he died, postmarked from Denver. I had found it among his things, still sealed. Every year on this night, I was tempted to open it, to find out what words had arrived just before his world went dark. But I never did. Some truths I had long ago decided were better left buried. But as I placed the box back in the drawer, a single chilling thought surfaced. Frederick Montgomery's reaction to Henry's portrait, the way he'd said the name Sullivan. What if the past wasn't buried at all? What if it had just walked out of the storm and onto my porch? The main house at Blue Valley Ranch was dark, except for a single lamp burning in the study. Frederick swung down from his horse, his bandaged hand throbbing a dull, steady rhythm. Daniel was still up. He sighed, bracing himself. Inside, the house was quiet. Daniel sat at the massive oak desk that had once been his father's, ranch ledgers spread before him. He looked up as Frederick entered, relief flickering in his warm brown eyes, his mother's eyes. You're late, Daniel said, his gaze immediately falling on the bandage. What happened to your hand? The storm, Frederick said, pouring himself a whiskey, Lightning struck a tree over at Sullivan's Haven. I helped the widow put out a small fire. Daniel's eyebrows shot up. Sullivan's Haven? You mean you actually spoke to Margaret Hayes? Circumstances required it. Frederick took a long swallow of the whiskey, the burn a welcome distraction. And how is the mysterious widow of Copper Ridge? Daniel leaned back in his chair. Half the town thinks she's a ghost. The other half thinks she's hiding some dark secret from her past. She seemed ordinary, Frederick said, but the word felt wrong. There was nothing ordinary about the quiet strength in her eyes. Nothing ordinary about the way she'd stood her ground against the storm. With that daughter of hers, Lily, Daniel added, I've seen her in town. She's a beautiful girl, but she has a look that could stop a charging bull. Frederick shot his son a sharp glance. Don't get any ideas. The Hayes woman made it clear they can manage just fine on their own. Daniel chuckled. Sounds like your kind of woman, Pa. Stubborn as they come. Frederick ignored the jibe. He drained his glass. It's late. We have fences to mend tomorrow. Already done, Daniel said. Jenkins and the boys handled it this afternoon. A familiar feeling washed over Frederick. Uselessness. The ranch ran like a well-oiled machine without him. Daniel was more than capable. He was thriving. That should have made him proud. Instead, it just made him feel old. Good work, he said gruffly, gesturing at the ledgers. Daniel's face lit up at the rare praise. Thanks, Pa. I was thinking, maybe it's time we invest in some of those new Hereford bulls. They say the calves are hardier, fetch a better price. They're untested in a Wyoming winter, Frederick cautioned. One bad blizzard and we lose everything. Or we double our profits, Daniel countered. Sometimes you have to take a risk to move forward, Pa. The words hung in the air between them. A gentle challenge. Once, Frederick had been the one taking risks. He'd been the one with vision. But that man had been buried 4 years ago, right alongside Rebecca, under the aspens on the hill. We'll talk about it, he conceded. Good night, son. In his own room, Frederick unwrapped the bandage. The widow's work was neat, efficient. The pain in his hand was nothing compared to the turmoil in his mind. Henry Sullivan. The name echoed in his head. The face in that portrait was seared into his memory. He closed his eyes, but it did no good. The past came rushing back, as clear and as brutal as if it were yesterday. The smoke, the chaos of the ambush at Willow Creek, the screams of dying men, the terrible weight of command, of making a choice that you knew would cost lives. Captain Henry Sullivan, 18th New York Infantry, a good man, a brave officer. Frederick had come west to escape that memory, to bury the ghosts of the war under the vast empty sky. He had built a new life, a fortress of solitude and hard work. And now a ghost had found him. It was hanging on a widow's wall, staring at him with accusing eyes, eyes that seemed to know the secret he had carried for nearly 2 decades. He had made a decision at Willow Creek, a decision that had sent Captain Sullivan and his men straight into a death trap. He had never known for sure what happened to him. The official reports were chaotic, listing Sullivan as missing in action, presumed dead. Frederick had tried to find out more, to find a widow, a family to offer, what? An apology? An explanation? He'd never found them. He had assumed they were back east, lost in the sea of post-war grief. But they weren't. They were here, in Copper Ridge, his neighbor, the woman whose barn he had just saved. Sleep did not come. When he finally drifted off, his dreams were a feverish nightmare of battle and fire, in the face of a man he had sent to his death. And in the dream he saw something else, an unopened letter, a letter he himself had written 19 years ago. A desperate, guilt-ridden confession, sent to the last known address of Captain Henry Sullivan's family, a letter that had never been answered. Sunday morning in Copper Ridge was a ritual. The whole town gathered at the small Methodist church, as much for the gossip as for the grace. I sat with Lily in our usual pew, feeling the weight of 100 curious eyes on me. News of the fire and of Frederick Montgomery's visit would have spread through town like a prairie fire itself. Pastor Wilson was in fine form, his voice booming as he spoke of community. "Two are better than one," he quoted from the good book. "For if they fall, One will lift up his fellow, but woe to him who is alone when he falls. His words felt like a direct accusation. I had chosen to be alone. I had built my walls high and thick. I glanced across the aisle. Frederick Montgomery sat with Daniel, his face a stone mask. But I saw the tension in his shoulders. The sermon was hitting its mark with him too. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I looked away, my face hot. After the service, the churchyard was a buzz of chatter. Pastor Wilson held my hand a moment too long at the door. "Margaret," he said, his eyes kind but probing, "might I have a word with you this week? I'm organizing a community project." Before I could answer, Agatha Barnes, the town's self-appointed queen of gossip, descended upon us. "Margaret Hayes," she boomed. "And Pastor, what a sermon! Just what some people needed to hear." Her eyes darted meaningfully toward Frederick, who was standing stiffly by the church steps. Agatha's matchmaking was legendary and relentless. I tried to escape, but she was already in full sail. "And have you told Margaret about your wonderful idea?" she gushed to the pastor. "The letter exchange." "A letter exchange? It's a way to foster connection," Pastor Wilson explained. "Everyone writes a letter anonymously. We place them in a box, and then each person draws a letter to respond to. A way to speak from the heart, without the pressure of a face-to-face conversation." "I'm not sure I'd have much to say," I demurred. "Nonsense," Agatha chirped, patting my arm. "It will do you a world of good. Everyone needs to expand their circle." Her gaze drifted toward Frederick again, as subtle as a blacksmith's hammer. I felt a flash of irritation. Did the whole town see me as a lonely widow in need of a project? Or a husband? The pastor just chuckled. "Think about it, Margaret. That's all I ask." As I turned to leave, I almost ran right into him. Frederick Montgomery. He was standing right there, having a quiet word with his son. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice low. "Mr. Montgomery," I replied, my heart doing a strange little flutter. "Pastor Wilson was just telling me about his letter exchange," he said. A hint of amusement flickered in his winter sky eyes. "He seems to think it will cure all the ills of Copper Ridge. He seems to think it will cure us. In particular," I said, surprising myself with my bluntness. A real smile touched his lips this time. It changed his entire face, softening the hard lines. "So it would seem." We stood there for a moment in a strange, unspoken truce. Two recluses, being pushed back into the world by a well-meaning pastor and a meddling shopkeeper. Then Daniel Montgomery stepped forward. "Mrs. Hayes," he said with a polite nod. He had his father's build, but his mother's warm smile. "I'm Daniel. It's a pleasure to finally meet you properly." We exchanged a few pleasantries about the weather and the price of cattle. He was charming, easy to talk to, so different from his brooding father. As they walked away, I watched them go. The father carrying a weight I couldn't yet name. The son walking with a freedom that seemed a world away. That night, Lily found me on the porch, staring out at the stars. "Are you going to do it?" she asked. "The letter exchange?" "I'm thinking about it," I admitted. "You should," she said softly. "Papa wouldn't have wanted you to be alone forever." Her words were like a key, unlocking a door I had kept bolted for 3 years. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to let a little bit of the world back in. But as I thought about writing to a stranger, my mind kept drifting back to one man, to Frederick Montgomery, and to the chilling realization that he was no stranger at all. He was a piece of Henry's past, a piece I didn't understand, a ghost from a place called Willow Creek. And I had a feeling this letter exchange was about to get a lot more complicated than Pastor Wilson ever intended. Deep in her room, Lily Sullivan had a secret. She sat cross-legged on her bed, a journal open on her lap. But she wasn't writing about her day. She was plotting. "Mama won't do it," she wrote, her pen scratching across the page. "She'll find a dozen reasons to say no. She's built a fortress around her heart, and she's forgotten how to lower the bridge." Lily looked at the fresh sheet of paper on her desk. An idea had taken root in her mind, a daring, deceptive idea. If her mother wouldn't write the letter, then she would write it for her. She dipped her pen in the ink, carefully mimicking her mother's elegant, formal script. She channeled Margaret's voice, her dignity, her sorrow. the quiet strength that Lily admired so much. "Dear friend," she began, "I find myself at a crossroads. For 3 years I have found purpose in my work, in my responsibilities. But I have begun to wonder if survival is enough. Perhaps you too know what it is to build a wall for protection, only to find you have built yourself a prison." She wrote of grief, of loneliness, of the courage it takes to admit you need another person. It was a beautiful letter, a heartbreakingly honest letter, a letter her mother would never ever write. She sealed it in an envelope, writing Margaret Hayes on the outside. Now she just needed a way to get it into the box at the church without her mother finding out. A small lie, she told herself, in the service of a greater truth. Papa would have understood. Across the valley in the study at Blue Valley Ranch, a very similar scene was unfolding. Daniel Montgomery stared at the blank page in front of him. His father had already dismissed the letter exchange as a foolish waste of time. Frederick had retreated so far into his grief for Rebecca that he barely spoke to his own son, let alone a stranger. But Daniel remembered a different man, a father who laughed, who told stories, who had taught him how to read the land and the sky. That man was still in there somewhere, buried under years of pain. Maybe a letter could be the shovel that started to dig him out. Daniel picked up his pen. He didn't try to mimic his father's handwriting. He just wrote from the heart, imagining what his father would say if he could only find the words. "To whom it may concern," he wrote, "I am told that isolation has become too comfortable a companion for me. Perhaps they are right. It has been 4 years since I lost my wife, and I fear I have forgotten the language of connection. I am a simple man, concerned with the weather and the herd. But I remember a time when words came more easily. If you have the patience for a man relearning an old tongue, I would welcome your thoughts." He signed it Frederick Montgomery. He folded it, sealed it, and started thinking. He too would need a plan to get this letter into the box without its supposed author knowing. A little bit of deception, he reasoned, was a small price to pay for a chance to bring his father back to the world of the living. Two children, a valley apart, both weaving a web of well-intentioned lies. They had no idea they were about to catch themselves in it. Sunday came, and the church hall was buzzing like a beehive. It seemed the entire county had turned out for the letter exchange. A large, ornate wooden box sat on a table at the front of the room. I had written my own letter, a simple, cautious thing that said very little. But as I stood in line, I saw Lily talking animatedly with her friend Emily. At just the right moment, as I was distracted by Mrs. Barnes, Lily slipped near the box. I saw a flash of white as she added an envelope. Her own, I presumed. I thought nothing of it. Across the room, Daniel Montgomery was executing a similar plan, using a conversation with the sheriff as a diversion, while he added his father's forged letter to the pile. The moment of truth arrived. Pastor Wilson stirred the letters dramatically. "Now," he announced, "each participant will draw a letter at random. This will be your correspondent." One by one, people went up to the box. When my turn came, I reached in, my fingers brushing against the crisp paper. I pulled out an envelope. My breath caught in my throat. Written on the front, in a bold masculine hand, was the name Frederick Montgomery. My heart hammered against my ribs. Of all the people in Copper Ridge, was it fate, or had Agatha and the pastor rigged the whole thing? I looked across the room. Frederick was holding his own letter, his face unreadable. He had drawn a letter too. My letter? No, I had mine right here. He must have drawn someone else's, an unsettling thought. He would be writing to some other woman while I was writing to him. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was the chaos that had just been set in motion. I had drawn the letter Daniel wrote as his father. And Frederick? He had drawn the letter Lily wrote as me. That night I sat in my room and opened the letter. The words on the page were not what I expected. They were thoughtful, vulnerable, full of a quiet pain that resonated with my own. This wasn't the grim, silent rancher I knew. This was a man of depth, a man with a poet's soul. I have forgotten the language of connection he had written, and I thought, I know that language. I can teach it to you again. Meanwhile, at Blue Valley, Frederick read the letter he believed was from me. He saw not a reclusive, hardened widow, but a woman of grace and intelligence, wrestling with her grief but not broken by it. Perhaps you, too, know what it is to build a wall for protection, she had written, and he felt a profound shock of recognition. And in their separate rooms, two children read the letters that were really meant for their parents. Lily opened the simple, guarded letter I had actually written. It was nothing like the passionate, soul-bearing confession she had penned. She sighed. Her mother still had so far to go. But now she was in a correspondence with who? Who had written that beautiful, sad letter signed by Frederick Montgomery? It didn't sound like the man she'd seen on her porch. Daniel read the elegant, heartfelt letter Lily had written. He was stunned. Margaret Hayes was nothing like the town gossip suggested. She was brilliant. She was insightful. She was magnificent. The thought of his father corresponding with such a woman filled him with hope. 4 people, 2 houses, a web of secrets and crossed wires. And in the pastor's house, Thomas Wilson knelt by his bed. He had, in fact, given fate a little nudge. He had switched the letters to ensure Margaret and Frederick were paired. A small sin, he prayed, for a greater good. He had no idea he had just paired their children instead. The Wyoming wind blew across the valley, carrying secrets on its breath. And a story had begun that was far more tangled and far more dangerous than anyone could have possibly imagined. The letters began to fly back and forth, twice a week, carried by the mail rider, and a strange, four-sided courtship began. I found myself waiting for the mail with an eagerness I hadn't felt in years. I was falling in love with the man in those letters. The Frederick Montgomery on the page was thoughtful, intelligent, and deeply sensitive. He spoke of his grief for Rebecca with a raw honesty that made me feel less alone. He spoke of the land not as a possession, but as a living thing. You wrote that solitude is a sanctuary, while isolation is a prison, he wrote in one letter. I find myself wondering when I laid the first brick of my own prison wall. I would read his words over and over, feeling a connection so deep it startled me. This was a man who understood. This was a man I could, perhaps, learn to love. Meanwhile, Frederick Montgomery was having the exact same experience. The Margaret Hayes in the letters he received was a revelation. She was witty, passionate, and fiercely intelligent. She challenged his thinking. She made him laugh. She spoke of her late husband, Henry, with a love that was profound but not imprisoning. You ask what dreams brought me to Wyoming, she wrote. I came for my husband's dream, but I stayed for my own. I found a freedom in this harsh land that the soft life in Boston could never offer. Frederick was captivated. He was falling for the widow of Copper Ridge, a woman he was discovering, letter by letter. Of course, they were both falling for ghosts, phantoms created by their own children. The real correspondence was happening between Lily and Daniel. They were the ones truly connecting, pouring their own hopes, dreams, and sorrows into the letters. They debated books they'd read. They shared their frustrations with their grieving parents. They spoke of their own futures. Without ever meeting, without even knowing it, they were baring their souls to each other. Lily found herself writing things she would never say aloud, crafting responses to Daniel's thoughtful prose, which she believed was from Frederick. Daniel, in turn, was mesmerized by the fierce intelligence and passion of Lily's letters, which he believed were from Margaret. It was a tangled, dangerous mess, and it was about to get worse. One afternoon, Daniel was out checking fence lines when his father rode up. Frederick looked different, lighter. The heavy cloak of grief he usually wore seemed to have lifted slightly. I've been thinking about your idea, Frederick said, shocking Daniel. Those Hereford bulls. Maybe it's time we took a risk. Daniel stared at him. What changed your mind, Pa? Frederick just shrugged. A man can't stand still forever. He either moves forward or the world leaves him behind. He paused, then added, I'm riding into town on Thursday. I need some supplies. Daniel could barely hide his astonishment. His father hadn't willingly gone to town for anything but church in years. The letters were working. The deception, the guilt Daniel felt over it. It was all worth it to see his father coming back to life. That same morning at Sullivan's Haven, I was in the kitchen with Lily. You're humming, I observed. Lily blushed. Force of habit. But I knew better. She'd been lighter, happier these past few weeks. I heard the Montgomerys might be in town on Thursday, I said, trying to sound casual. Agatha mentioned Frederick has been taking more of an interest in town affairs. I saw the flicker of something in Lily's eyes. She knew exactly what I was doing. She knew I was fishing for information about the man I was secretly writing to, the man I was becoming obsessed with. She just smiled. People heal at their own pace, I suppose. Thursday came. Lily rode into town for supplies, her real mission to post her latest letter and pick up the reply. Daniel rode in with his father, his own forged letter tucked securely in his coat. Their paths were about to cross, and the carefully constructed world of letters was about to collide with reality. At the general store, Agatha Barnes handed Lily an envelope with a conspiratorial wink. Your mother's correspondent is a dedicated one. Third letter this week. Lily tucked it away, her face burning. As she turned to leave, the bell on the door chimed. Daniel Montgomery walked in, followed by his father. For a moment, everyone just stood there. It was the first time all four of them had been in the same room since the letter exchange began. The air was thick with secrets. I wasn't there, of course. I was back at the boarding house waiting for the mail, dreaming of a man who didn't exist. But then something happened that no one could have predicted. Frederick Montgomery stepped forward. He wasn't looking at Lily. He was looking past her, out the door, a strange expression on his face. Mrs. Hayes, he said, his voice quiet. But he wasn't talking to me. There was no one there. Daniel and Lily exchanged a confused glance. Agatha Barnes just looked bewildered. Pa? Daniel said. There's no one there. Frederick didn't seem to hear him. He took another step toward the empty doorway. He raised his unbandaged hand, as if in greeting. Captain Sullivan, he said, his voice cracking with an emotion I would have never associated with him. Henry, is that you? He was staring into empty space, but he wasn't seeing nothing. He was seeing a ghost, my husband's ghost. And in that moment, the first thread of their intricate deception began to unravel. The church hall was a chaotic buzz of activity. The whole town was preparing for the Founders' Day celebration, and Lily found herself roped into making paper garlands with her friend Emily. Thank goodness you're here, Emily wailed. I have the artistic talent of a rock. As Lily started skillfully twisting wire and paper, Emily leaned in close. Oh, have you met Daniel Montgomery? He's helping build the platform, and he is so handsome. Before Lily could react, Emily was waving him over. Daniel, come meet my friend, Lily Sullivan. He walked toward them, wiping sawdust from his hands. Up close, he was even more striking. He had his father's height, but a warmth in his eyes that was all his own. Miss Sullivan, he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. It's a pleasure. Mr. Montgomery, she replied, her heart doing a strange little flip. They talked for a few minutes, their conversation easy and natural. There was a strange sense of familiarity between them, as if they already knew each other, which in a way they did. They had been baring their souls to each other for weeks, hiding behind the names of their parents. As they spoke, Lily looked over at the half-finished platform and saw Frederick Montgomery talking with Pastor Wilson. She tried to reconcile the stern, silent man with the sensitive, eloquent writer of the letters. It didn't make sense. The disconnect was jarring. Just then, Frederick glanced over. His eyes met Lily's across the crowded room, and she saw it. A flicker of profound sadness, a depth of pain that the letters had only hinted at. Maybe Daniel's forgery wasn't a complete fabrication. Maybe he had captured an essential truth about his father that the world never saw. The moment was broken by an unexpected arrival. I walked into the hall bringing a basket of sandwiches for the volunteers. Mama! Lily called out, a note of panic in her voice. Daniel spun around. His eyes widened slightly as he saw me. He had been writing to this woman for weeks, pretending to be his father. Now here I was, in the flesh. And then Frederick turned. He saw me. His face, which had been animated in conversation with the pastor, went rigid. The mask slammed back into place. The four of us were now in the same space, the four corners of this bizarre, secret-filled square. An awkward silence fell over our little group. Daniel looking at the woman he'd been writing to. Lily looking at the man she'd been writing to. And me and Frederick looking at each other, both of us thinking about the letters we believed we were sharing, letters that were weaving a connection between us. It was Frederick who broke the silence. Mrs. Hayes, he said, his voice stiff. I was in town and this arrived for you at the general store. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, neatly wrapped package. He had gone out of his way to bring it to me. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery, I said, taking it. That was very kind. I was heading out your way regardless, he lied. Later that afternoon, he showed up on my porch. I was just passing by, he said, another lie. He had the package with him. He had ridden all the way from town to deliver it himself. I invited him in for coffee. We sat in the parlor under the watchful eyes of Henry's portrait. The conversation was stilted at first, but then I asked him about his wife, Rebecca. He spoke of her with a quiet, profound grief. The suddenness is its own cruelty, he said. No time to say the things that need to be said. I knew exactly what he meant. Then he motioned to the package. Aren't you going to open it? I unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a book of poetry. Tennyson. Tucked inside was a note from Agatha Barnes. This made me think of you. Frederick took the book, his rough fingers surprisingly gentle on the pages. He read a line aloud. "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." You know it, I asked, surprised. A small smile touched his lips. I was educated before I became a rancher, Mrs. Hayes. In that moment, I saw a glimpse of another man. Not the brooding rancher, and not the sensitive poet from the letters, but someone in between. Someone real. Someone complicated. As he was leaving, he paused on the porch. He looked at me, and for a second, I thought he was going to say something from the letters. Something personal. But he just said, "Thank you for the coffee." I watched him ride away, my mind reeling. The connection I felt to him was undeniable. But who was I connecting with? The man who just sat in my parlor? Or the man who wrote me beautiful letters? And were they the same person at all? The next day, Lily came to me, her face pale. "Mama," she said, her voice trembling, "I have to tell you something." She confessed everything. How she had written the first letter in my name. How she had been corresponding with someone she thought was Frederick Montgomery. "But it's not him," she said, her eyes filling with tears. She pulled 2 letters from her pocket. "Daniel Montgomery gave me this one yesterday. He said it was from his father. The handwriting is completely different from all the others." I took the letters, my hands were shaking. One was in the familiar, flowing script I had come to cherish. The other was in a bold, almost aggressive hand. It was the one he'd sent inviting me on a ride. The truth crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. Lily had been writing to someone, pretending to be me, and someone had been writing to me, pretending to be Frederick. "Who?" I whispered. "Who has been writing to me?" "I think," Lily's voice was barely audible. "I think it was Daniel. He was pretending to be his father, and I was pretending to be you. So we were writing to each other. It was insane, a farce, a ridiculous tangled-up mess. I should have been furious, but a strange hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. Then Lily handed me the letter from the real Frederick, the one in the bold, decisive handwriting. It was an invitation. "Mrs. Hayes, I find myself thinking of our conversation. Perhaps you would join me for a ride this Saturday. There is a place on my land I would like to show you." He was reaching out, the real man. After all the lies, all the deception, he was making a move of his own. "What are you going to do?" Lily asked, her eyes wide. I looked at the invitation. I thought of the man on my porch, the sadness in his eyes, the glimpse of a shared understanding. I thought of the letters from the phantom poet, the words that had woken up my heart, and I made a decision. "I'm going to go," I said. "I'm going to meet the real Frederick Montgomery, and I'm going to find out what other secrets he's been keeping." Because I had a chilling suspicion that this twisted letter exchange was just the tip of the iceberg. The real mystery had to do with my husband, Henry, and a dark secret buried in a place called Willow Creek. The morning of the ride, I stood in front of my mirror, my hands trembling slightly as I fastened the buttons on my riding habit. Lily hovered in the doorway. "You look lovely, Mama." I felt like a fraud. I was about to spend the day with a man, knowing that the foundation of our connection was a lie I was now complicit in. He arrived at 10 o'clock sharp. He brought a gentle mare for me, and we rode out toward Blue Valley. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was watchful. We were two spies from different countries meeting on neutral ground, each trying to figure out the other's true allegiances. He took me up a winding trail into the foothills. The higher we climbed, the more the world opened up below us. Finally, we reached a rocky outcrop, a flat shelf of stone that overlooked the entire valley. It was breathtaking. "I come here when I need to think," he said, his voice quiet. "It helps put things in perspective." We stood there for a long time, not talking. The wind whipped around us. Below, the world looked small, orderly, manageable. "I haven't brought anyone here since Rebecca," he said softly. "Not even Daniel." The weight of that confession settled over me. He was giving me something real, a piece of his true self. "Why me?" I asked. He turned to face me, his winter sky eyes searching mine. "Because when we spoke in your parlor, you understood. You know what it's like to have to rebuild a life from the ashes." He was right. I did. In that moment, the letters, the lies, they all seemed to fade away. There was just this. Two lonely people, standing on a mountain, recognizing the same scars on each other's souls. Then he said the words that made my blood run cold. "I've been reading your letters," he said, "and I've been rereading Henry's." My breath caught. "Henry's letters?" "His military reports," he clarified, and my heart started beating again. "From before the ambush. I was his commanding officer, you see, at Willow Creek." There it was, the name, the ghost that had been haunting the edges of our story. "I made a call that day," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He was staring out at the valley, but I knew he was seeing something else entirely. A battlefield, smoke and fire. "I sent a scouting party to check a ridge. The intelligence was wrong. It was a trap." He paused. The wind howled around us. "Captain Sullivan's unit walked right into it. I sent your husband to his death, Mrs. Hayes." The confession hung in the air, brutal and raw. This was the weight he carried. This was the ghost that haunted him. He believed he was responsible for Henry's death. My mind was reeling. Henry hadn't died at Willow Creek. He'd been captured. He'd spent 2 years in a prison camp before being released. He had come home. We had moved west. We had built this life together. He had died here in Wyoming, from a fever that took him in 3 short days. Frederick didn't know. He had been carrying this guilt, this terrible burden, for almost 20 years, for a death that never happened the way he thought. He thought he was confessing to the widow of a man he'd killed. What he didn't know was that I was holding the proof of his innocence, or at least a different kind of guilt. That unopened letter in my desk drawer, the one that had arrived just before Henry died. I had never looked closely at the postmark, but now a memory surfaced. Denver. Frederick had been in Denver just before he moved to Wyoming. And the return address. I had never paid it any mind, but suddenly I could see the faint, faded scrawl in my mind's eye. F. Montgomery. The letter wasn't from a stranger. It was from him. He had written to Henry, 19 years after the war. A letter that Henry never got to read. A letter that I had kept sealed. A mystery I was too afraid to solve. Now, standing on this mountain, I knew I had to open it. The truth, whatever it was in that envelope. I looked at Frederick, at the agony etched on his face. He was waiting for my judgment, for my hatred. "There's something you don't know," I said, my voice shaking. "Henry didn't die at Willow Creek." The color drained from his face. He stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What?" "He was a prisoner of war," I said. "He survived. He came home." "But the reports, the reports were wrong," I said. "He died 3 years ago. Here, in his own bed." He stumbled back, his hand going to a nearby rock for support. The foundation of his grief, the bedrock of his guilt for the last 2 decades, had just crumbled into dust. He looked lost. "But then, why?" he whispered. "Why did you let me believe—" "I didn't know," I said. "Not until this very moment. Not until you said his name." We rode back down the mountain in a stunned silence. The whole world had shifted on its axis. He wasn't the man who had killed my husband. He was just a man, haunted by a ghost of his own making. When we reached my porch, he wouldn't look at me. I I need to think, he stammered and rode away without another word. I went straight to my room. My hands trembled as I took out the wooden box. I pulled out the yellowed envelope. I stared at the name on the front, Captain Henry Sullivan, and in the corner, the return address, F. Montgomery, Denver. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. With a shaking finger, I broke the wax seal, a seal that had been unbroken for 3 long years. I unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The handwriting was bold, decisive. The same hand that had invited me on the ride. The hand of the real Frederick Montgomery. My eyes scanned the lines. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't an apology for getting him killed. It was something else entirely. Something so shocking, so unexpected, that I had to read it 3 times before the words sank in. Henry, it began, I have just learned from a mutual acquaintance that you survived Andersonville. I am in Denver on business and heard a rumor of a Henry Sullivan, late of the 18th of New York, now ranching in Wyoming. If this letter finds you, and you are indeed that man, then there is something you must know. The ambush at Willow Creek was not a matter of bad intelligence. We were betrayed. My blood ran cold. I have evidence, the letter continued, that a fellow officer, a man we both trusted, sold our positions to the enemy for gold. He is the one responsible for what happened to you and your men. His name is... I stared at the name on the page. A name I knew. A name I had heard just last week. A pillar of the Copper Ridge community. A man everyone trusted. Pastor Thomas Wilson, the kindly old pastor. The man who had organized the letter exchange. The man who had pushed Frederick and me together. It wasn't a matchmaking scheme. It was a cover-up. He was trying to manage the situation, to control the 2 people who held the keys to his dark past. The whole thing was a lie. All of it. And Henry had never read this letter. He had died without ever knowing the truth. But I knew now, and I knew what I had to do. The next day was Founder's Day. The whole town was gathered in the square. The newly built platform stood in the center, decorated with the very paper garlands Lily and Daniel had made together. I saw Frederick standing near the back of the crowd, his face a grim mask. Our eyes met. He looked lost, adrift. The guilt he had carried for 20 years was gone, but now it was replaced by a terrible, gaping uncertainty. Daniel and Lily were standing together, talking quietly, the architects of a deception that had, against all odds, led to a kind of truth. They had found each other through their lies. Now they looked at each other with a fragile, dawning hope. Then Pastor Wilson stepped up to the podium. He smiled his benevolent smile, his silver hair shining in the sun. He began to speak of community, of trust, of the bonds that held Copper Ridge together. My hand tightened on the letter in my pocket. The paper felt like a burning coal against my skin. I started walking toward the platform. The crowd parted for me. I could feel their eyes on me. The widow Hayes, the recluse, striding through the center of town with a look of terrible purpose on her face. I reached the steps of the platform. Pastor Wilson faltered, his sermon dying on his lips. He saw the look in my eyes. He saw the letter in my hand, and he knew. Pastor, I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying across the silent square. I believe you have something to tell us about a place called Willow Creek. The color drained from his face. The benevolent mask shattered, revealing the craven traitor beneath. Frederick pushed his way through the crowd, his eyes blazing with a righteous fury I had never seen. Daniel and Lily were right behind him. The truth had come to Copper Ridge, and it was time for justice. The chaos that erupted in the town square was something they'd talk about for generations. Pastor Wilson, exposed and terrified, tried to flee. But Sheriff Carter was there, and the story came tumbling out. A story of greed, betrayal, and a secret he had carried for 20 years. He had indeed sold the troop movements. The gold he received had been the foundation of his respectable life, the seed money for his journey west, for his reinvention as a man of God. He had come to Copper Ridge to bury his past, never imagining that 2 of its ghosts would one day become his neighbors. Justice was swift. Wilson was taken into custody, his life of lies in ruins. In the aftermath, the 4 of us stood together amidst the stunned silence of the town. The web of deception we had all woven was now laid bare. Lily and Daniel looked at each other, then at us. "We're so sorry," Lily whispered. "We just wanted to help." Frederick looked at his son, and for the first time, I saw not a stern rancher or a haunted veteran, but just a father. "You brought me back to life, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "even if you did it the hard way." He then turned to me. The secrets were all out now. The ghosts were laid to rest. There was nothing between us but the raw, unvarnished truth. "Margaret," he said, and for the first time, he used my given name. It sounded right. "The man in those letters Daniel wrote, he tried to imagine the man I used to be, the man I wanted to be again. And the woman in the letters Lily wrote," I replied, "she was the woman I had forgotten how to be, the woman who believed in second chances." He took my hand. His palm was rough, calloused, but his touch was gentle. "Is it too late for a second chance?" What he asked. "For us? The real us?" I looked at this man, this stranger who was not a stranger at all. We had been brought together by a storm, by a fire, by a web of lies, and by a truth that had been buried for 2 decades. Our story was a mess. It was complicated and strange, but it was ours. "No, Frederick," I said, a real smile, a true smile, finally reaching my eyes. "It's not too late at all. It's just the beginning." We started over. Not as ghosts, not as phantoms in letters, but as two people who had walked through the fire and found each other on the other side. Our children who had tried to write our love story for us now had their own story to write, a story built not on deception, but on the strange and wonderful truth of how they met. The past can be a prison, built brick by painful brick, but sometimes all it takes is one spark of connection, one unexpected act of courage to tear the walls down. If you enjoyed this story and you believe in the power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds, don't forget to subscribe. There are always more secrets to uncover.